Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, we shukr Allah that we can gather here today in peace and tranquility. Whereas in other parts of the world, a bomb is being thrown into the Jummah, killing people. May Allah forbid that we ever become so intolerant and sink so low that we can kill a fellow Muslim brother by throwing a bomb into a Jummah. First and foremost, I want to thank Sheikh and the committee for affording me the opportunity to share my little knowledge about our history here at the Cape, and specifically about Saattjie van the Kaap. Now, van the Kaap implies that she was born here at the Cape as a slave. And if you happen to come from the island of Java, it would say Potru from Java, not a surname. But if you were born a slave here at the Cape, you would refer to the person as van the Kaap, born here at the Cape. Sarti and her father Corridon from Ceylon. Not all slaves came from Indonesia. Many slaves came from India, from Bengal, from Malabar. And this particular person, Corridon, who is the father of Sarti, came from the island of Ceylon. He married a lady at the Cape by the name of Train. And Train was also van the Kaap, also a slave woman. So Saattjie was actually born as a little slave girl in 1770. But the big difference about Saattjie's father, Corridon of Ceylon, is the first Muslim to purchase property in the Kaap in 1794. And that particular property is the present Masjid in Dorp Street and the adjacent plot next to it. But my story today is actually about Sarti and not about the father. When he died in 1697, his wife, Train, she inherited his property, the 2 plots. She must have been an astute businesswoman because in addition to the property, she ran some sort of a lodge. She was the owner of 4 slaves. Even Muslims owned slaves in that time. Even Tuan Guru owned slaves, and even his son, Abdul Rakib and Abdul Rauf, they all owned slaves. But the beauty of it that they made in their testament, in their will, that when they die, the slaves would be set free. That is the beauty of Islam here at the Cape, of Muslims who own slaves. Now, the fact that she could have boarders, she had 4 slave boarders also, 4 males and 1 female. It tells you that she must have an extensive place there, the 2 properties, to accommodate. But that was a way of generating money. By 1809, but let me first focus on the slaves. Where did the slaves live? During the Dutch period, that's in the way back van Riebeeck's time, the slaves used to sleep in the slave lodge. That building is still there at the top of Adderley Street. But in this particular period I'm referring to, that's way past the slave lodge period, slaves were staying all over in the city with Muslims. And in addition, the slaves, they would sleep in the attic or in a cellar or in an outbuilding that belonged to the owner. And the woman who was a slave, she would sleep on the kitchen floor in the house of the owner. And in the morning, she would have to roll up her bedding and put it in the box. And that particular box could be searched by her owner or the authorities at any time to look for stolen goods. Free blacks, that is a person who had been a slave and is now free. There were many of them in Cape Town. They owned property, they had houses and what have you in later years. But they had no rights like the whites. They were not regarded as fully fledged citizens of the city. In fact, if you were a slave and you walk at night, you had to walk with a lantern to identify yourself. And if you wanted to leave the city, you had to get a dompas, a permit to leave the city. That is the way the apartheid mentality was already vested in the white minds in those particular period. It was only carried on with statutes in the apartheid era, but it was there all the time, the prejudice against those who were not white. But coming back to 1809, when she asked her daughter Saattjie, asked her daughter to buy the property, and she paid 3,000 guilders, which in our money today is about plus minus 27,000 rand. And what does it tell you? That Sarti herself must have been an astute businesswoman, that she could afford to buy the property. But the beauty of Sarti is, she must have been fairly well off. And she also married one of the great imams of Cape Town, Imam Ahmad of Bengala. And in 1841, when she had the will drafted, and this is where the beauty comes in, apart from the fact that she was married to Imam Ahmad of Bengala for 18 years at the time when she bought the property, because it is allowed in Islam for women to buy, even if you are married, to buy your own property. And the husband allowed that. So this makes her unique. She was one, if not the only woman at the time who was married and she could buy her own property here in Cape Town in 1809. But when she drafted to compile the testament in 1841, she made this most generous act where she said that this property, number 28 in Dorp Street, shall be used as a masjid, a Muhammadanse kerk, that's in the testament. For as long as Islam will survive here in the colony, it will be used as a church, as a masjid. And this is where the beauty comes in, where she carved the name into Cape Muslim history by becoming the first issue of Waqf property in the whole of South Africa. And this makes Saattjie unique. My question is, why would Saattjie have done that in 1809? To understand what was the motive behind her to give this Waqf to the community of Cape Town, we have to look what was Cape Town like in 1809. At the time when Saattjie was born in 1770, the only religion allowed was that of the Dutch Reformed Church. No other religion was allowed to be publicly practiced here at the Cape. The other church that came in later was the Lutheran Church in Strand Street in the 1780s. In fact, they built their one in 1697 already, they built their church. But no, and if you dare to propagate Islam publicly and practice it publicly, you run the risk of being put to death, or you could be flogged, or you could lose your property. That was a placatum that was issued from Batavia way back in 1642. So it was very difficult for Muslims to practice Islam because it was forbidden, it was banned. But this is where the beauty comes in. There is an ayah in the Quran. I'm not a Maulana, I'm just an ordinary teacher. But I know this beautiful ayah, وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. You can plan, and Allah planned, and He is the greatest planner of all. Now, despite the fact that Islam was forbidden, the Dutch inadvertently became the biggest agent of Islam. How? Because between 1652 and 1795, they exiled more than 200 political exiles, like Tuan Guru, like Sheikh Yusuf, and many of the awliya that lies buried there at the Cape, to the Cape. In addition, there's a list of imams, they call them the Panditan imams, convict imams, all sent to the Cape because they opposed Dutch imperialism in the land of birth. Because they were after the spice trade and the silk. It's the very same today. The Americans after the gas and the oil in the Middle East. That is why there are so many wars. At that time, it was silk and the spice trade. But the basic bottom line, it was about fulus, maximum profit. That was the main aim of the imperialists. Exploit these countries and make as much money for your shareholders. Now, you can imagine, in addition to the political exiles and the Pandit and Imams, there were also many Muslim convicts who transgressed Dutch law over there, and they were posted to the Cape to serve in the public works of the VOC. The VOC is die Verenigde Oos-Indiese Kompanje. That is in the company. So, what is the result of that? It changed the total demography of the Cape, of Cape Town per se. With so many Muslims here, they became the biggest agents for Islam. And this is where the ayah comes in. وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. Now, did Islam survive even during the Dutch period? Yes, it did, in a clandestine manner. I found that 2 years after Saattjie was born in 1772, there was a guy who came from Sweden, Carl Peter Sandberg. And he went to a home in Cape Town. There were no masajids, because the first masjid came only 1794. And he gives a detailed description of Muslims beautifully dressed and prachtige toppe soos ons nou hier sit, maar mooier as Hadji se top, silk toppe. And in the room there were women also. And there was a guy in one side of the room playing a violin. Dames en Kaaplaars, maar ons altyd lief vir musiek. And in addition, he says there's a pillow. And on the pillow there's a book. And he says this book is the Quran, and they were celebrating the new year. But after consulting the Hijri calendar, we found that that date, 20th of June, 1772, it was Rabbi al-Awwal. They were celebrating Mawlud al-Nabi in a house because there were no masajid. And I suspect there were many of these langars in Cape Town because they were not allowed to build masajid. Not only did they celebrate the Prophet's birthday, they also took his message to the slaves. Dawah. How do I know? Because in 1786, there was a young minister, Van Lier. He died very young. He's buried in Claremont somewhere in a beautiful grave. He was very upset. You know what about? That so many of the slaves are embracing Islam. And they had no way in which to stop this conversion, this reversion to Islam. In floods, they were embracing Islam. Why? Why would I accept the religion of the oppressor? Why would I accept the religion of the person who performs the most brutal forms of punishment here at the Cape and the VOC? Why would I accept their religion? Whereas on our side, our imams, they were the carriers of the flag of Islam. The dawah that they did was encouraged by the fact that the imams was there 24/7. If you're born, the imam is there to carry your child in on a pillow, beautiful, bedecked with flowers, to give your child a name. Like in the Strand, we still call it the shukar. In Cape Town, you call it the dupmal. When you're sick, the imam is there to come comfort you. When you have marriage problem, the imam is there to guide you. When you want to get married, the imam is there to marry you. Professor Robert Sell calls that from the cradle to the grave service. And when you die, the imam is there to bury you. From the cradle to the grave. Islam did not discriminate. Whether you were the richest person in the town or the poorest of the poor, Islam embraced especially the poor. In fact, when many of these slaves died, many of the Muslims would take that slave, have him properly coffined and buried there on the Tanabaru. Because there were many quarters there. Tanabaru is not the only one. It's one of the many that were given to the arms in the imams in the later period. This shows you the empathy and the beauty of Islam that attracted so many of the slaves to Islam. So much so that by 1842, 1/3 of Cape Town was Muslim, more than 6,000. But the dawah that I refer to, do you think the Dutch would have allowed it just to carry on like that? No. In 1799, 4 years before that, there was a huge conference in London, where the Dutch Mission Society and the Londoners came together. They must now go into the world and bring all the heathens. Muslims were heathens into the fold of Christianity. So in 1799, they sent Dr. van der Kemp with some missionaries to come to the Cape. By 1804, they established an African Mission Society. Beautifully, in 1804, under Batavian rule, Islam was unbanned. You could now practice Islam publicly. But, and this is the big but, not only was Islam unbanned, it now offered other missionaries to come in, and they came from Germany. They were the oldest, the Moravians. They established their mission station at Genatendal in 1780. They came from Ireland. They came from France. Very late came the Methodists in the early 1800s, 1816. What does it mean? They were coming in force to try, because in the records that I found, we don't have archives. So I went to their archives at Rhodes University. And in these rare records, I found that they were complaining about the flood of slaves that were embracing Islam, and they had no answer to it. I think for that reason, what we are celebrating here today is what our forebears established, that you and I can sit here today as Muslims. And for that, we should be abundantly grateful to see how we can uphold that tradition, that value system of Islam that they brought to this part of the southern tip of Africa. Right from the camp came, they established a religious society. They were now organized, targeting every community in the Strand where I lived. The Methodists had 3 stations there in slowly sparse. Some said they bought up land. Slaves can now build their own house, but you must embrace Christianity. And that is why many of the slaves fell for the carrot. They even tried in the Strand too, where there was a Muslim Jamaat as early as 1822. But now, I think the iman of those people were too strong. They couldn't convert them. In fact, my forebears also settled with that imam. And I want to tell the Consul General here that imam came from the Oval Masjid. Imam Ahmad of Bengala sent him that way to go Dawah on that side, not only in Cape Town, because there were many slaves on the farms in Somerset West, Stellenbosch area. So Imam Ahmad sent him out. His name is Imam Abdul Samad from the town of Semarang. And between 1822 and 1832, about 29 people from Java followed this imam and the Mizama at the Strand. So the Dawah was taking place not only in Cape Town, only in the rural areas. And in fact, in 1817, Barnabas Shaw, he was complaining. He says that while they are refused to preach in public, where there's established church and ordained ministers, the Mohammedan priests are moving into the interior and turning the slaves over to Islam. And I believe this Imam Abdul Samad from Semarang was one of those Imams. And this comes out of their records, because we don't have records. Van der Kemp died in 1811. They sent another missionary by the name of John Campbell to come to the Cape and make an assessment. How are they progressing with their mission work? In 1812, he wrote this in his book, Travels in South Africa. Here in Cape Town, about 20 Muslims clubbed together. And they hire a room, and to this room they invite the slaves. And when the slaves leave that room, they are anti-white, they are anti-Christian, they are Muslim. Dawah was taking place right under the nose of the missionaries here in Cape Town. And for that we say, Allahu Akbar, for our forebears, for the Dawah work that they started. And it continued, 1929, the late Ahmad David says in his book, The History of the Tanah Baru, on page 33, that Imam Ahmad of the masjid in Kapini Street, he built the original shrine of Sheikh Yusuf in 1864. He's got a picture in the book too. But I found, this is 1864, I found there was a twang already, it's in the little book that I'm selling, there was already a twang in 1829 when the Englishman came and he gave a detailed description. In 1857, another Austrian guy came here, Dr. Karl Schätze was circumnavigating the world, and he also gives a detailed description of the twang. 1829, this 1857, not only did he describe the twang, he also drew a sketch, and I've included that sketch in a little book that I'm selling here today. So you see, not only were they propagating Islam, they were honoring the founder of Islam, Sheikh Yusuf. Remember, there were no roads, the only sandy tracks. The only road came in 1845. That is the Voortrekker Road, as far as the Easter River. It took an oxen about 16 hours to travel from the castle to Somerset West. By horse, it took about 6 hours. Yet, these Muslims were carting material to erect a shrine on a hill there in the Kramat. 1829, it was there already. What else did Saattjie van der Kaap see around her by 1834? She died in 1847. So she was an elderly person in 1834. She saw the Dutch church was already there. She saw the Lutheran church that was there in Strand Street. She saw the Anglican church, 1829. She saw the Catholic church, 1833. She saw St. George's in Waalstraat, 1834. These buildings were rising here, dotting the landscape in Cape Town. Muslims had no mosque. And my take on the whole thing is, could this have influenced Sarti van der Kaap to make this beautiful nia, to make the land waqf, so that Muslims would have a place where they can look up to? This is the bastion of Islam here in the Kaap. I want to thank the late Dr. Ahmad Davids. He made it very easy for me because what he has written in his book, most of the Kaap and the history of Tanah Baru. And I want to thank Ibrahim Krombi for providing me the death certificate of Sarti van der Kaap, where all the children are mentioned. Sarti van der Kaap, if you look at the character of this woman, she was a very strong personality. Her husband died in 1843. But then her two sons were involved with the sons of Tuanguru. Just not even 100 meters away from the Dawah masjid, they opened another masjid there in Beitergraaf Street. So she was very upset that her children could do this to her and form another Jama'ah. So what she did, they were the executors of her testament. She totally excluded them. They cut them out. And she made an arrangement that when she died, they mustn't come near a funeral. She appointed Imam Bari to perform the funeral. This must have been very hard for her, but it tells you the strength of the character of this woman, that she can act so strongly against her own family because they went against the teaching we should unify, not break away. And that is eventually how all the masajid came about in the Kaap. My question is this. Saattjie has done this almost 180 years ago. She made the Sadaqatul Jariyah. What is your duty today as a Muslim? What can you contribute towards Islam? And I have a very simple answer what you can do. And this is, first of all, shukr Allah that we are Muslim. Secondly, you be the sultan in your home. It starts in the home. It's not the duty of the madrasa teacher or the teacher in primary school to teach your children adab. It is not the duty of your madrasa teacher to teach your child the value systems of Islam. If we can imbue those value systems and restore that beautiful akhlaq in our families, we will take Islam here in the Cape to another level. But it depends on you as the mother and the father. See that your child is properly dressed as a Muslim. Don't be too westernized that you forget that you are Muslim. I want to quote another guy who came here in 1853. His name is Goncharov, was a Russian author. He came from Caledon, and he was on his way back to Cape Town. But on his way, he saw a lot of ox wagons filled with Muslims. En perenkarre, wie waarvan komen hulle? Kom van die kramat af. Hulle gaan ziyarat, en gaan picknick, en gaan lekker, hulle uit gaan span daar in die kramat. But you know what this man says about them? He called them the Cape Malays. They say one thing about these people, they are honest people. And they are hardworking. Let us try to restore that image of Islam here amongst ourselves. Because here in our own communities, we find the biggest drug dealers. We can't shy away from it. It is there. But if we in our homes can inculcate in the minds of our children, stay away from the drug lord. It's easy money, I know. Do things that are halal, raise your children in the halal manner, then inshallah, we will restore Islam to that beautiful level that it was during the time of Sarti van der Kaap. The sad part is that the Dawah did not continue in the latter part of the 19th century, because then our masajid, there were so many masajid now, and they became involved in infighting with each other. Who should be the imam? In fact, Ahmad Davis has recorded this beautifully. More than 20 cases landed up in the High Court about who should be imam of the masjid. It is time, especially in this time of Islamophobia, what France is doing now, Macron, what happened in New Zealand, it's all over the world, this They fear Islam because Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. But it's up to you and me to restore that akhlaq and that beauty of Islam. Inshallah, may Allah grant that I be the first one to practice that in my own home with my own children. And shukran, Sheikh, for allowing me this.